All right, so we're diving into something a little different this week, huh? Hurricane Helene and all of this tax relief stuff from the IRS.
Hmm.
My first thought was, oh, Helene, yeah, didn't really impact me. But then I started digging into the IRS announcements, and whoa, boy, this is way bigger than it seems.
It really is. Most people probably think this is just about folks who were right there in the thick of it when the hurricane hit. But the IRS is casting a much wider net with this one, that's for sure.
Way wider. I mean, we're talking whole states here, right?
Mm.
If you're in Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, listen up. This impacts you. Oh, and it doesn't stop there. Parts of Florida, Tennessee,
Mm.
even Virginia, they're even getting specific with counties included. So, point is, even if you think, Helene, that wasn't me, you got to double check.
Yeah, never hurts to be sure, right? Especially with taxes. You don't want to mess around with those deadlines.
Oh, tell me about it. Speaking of deadlines, let's talk about this magic date, May 1, 2025. I swear, this date is like the key to unlocking a whole lot of breathing room.
It kind of is. Think of it this way. It's like the IRS hit the pause button on a bunch of your tax obligations. So, listeners, if you're looking at your 2024 individual and business taxes, the ones normally due in March and April of 2025, well, guess what? You now have until May 1st.
It's like a massive tax extension, but for like almost everyone. And it's not just those 2024 taxes either, right?
Yeah.
What about folks who filed for an extension on their 2023 returns?
Good point. If you filed an extension for your 2023 return, you get a bit of a reprieve as well. But T, and this is a big but, while the filing deadline gets pushed back, those 2023 payments were still due earlier this year.
Gotta love those little caveats, right? But hey, on the bright side, all those quarterly taxes, your estimated income, payroll tax, excise tax, the whole shebang, those all get shifted to that May 1st deadline as well. It's like the IRS looked at everyone's calendars and just said, you know what, let's just make it easy and give everyone a break.
And you know what? It's probably a welcome break for anyone who had to deal with the hurricane. It's kind of interesting, sometimes these previous disasters can even factor in. Like, remember earlier this year, Tropical Storm Debbie?
Oh, yeah, Debbie. That was a whole thing.
That's the one. So if you're already operating under that tax relief they issued for Debbie, guess what? Because of Helene, those deadlines just got pushed out even further.
Double whammy. Talk about deadline relief. Now, the IRS is calling all of this automatic relief. But knowing the IRS, I have a feeling it's not as simple as that, right?
You're right to be skeptical. See, this whole automatic thing hinges on whether or not the IRS has your current address. And let's be real, life happens, people move, they forget to update their info. It's completely normal.
Oh, you're telling me?
Yeah.
I've definitely moved and totally blanked on updating things. So it's not enough to just assume, oh, I'm in one of those impacted areas, I'm automatically covered.
Exactly. It really is best to double check. Take a few minutes to verify everything with the IRS just to be safe. Trust me, it can save you so many headaches down the line.
And here's where things get really interesting, especially for our listeners who, like me, were like, hold on, Helene, I wasn't anywhere near that. See, there's this whole other thing with the IRS, this records the affected area clause, and that's what really threw me for a loop.
Yeah, most people don't realize that disaster relief can apply to them even if they weren't physically in the disaster zone. So think about it this way. Your business might be totally fine, but if you've got those important tax records, whether they're physical documents or even just digital files, if they're stored in an impacted area, well, then you're impacted too, even if you yourself are miles away.
So just to be clear, let's say, hypothetically, my home office is safe and sound. No hurricane damage here. But my accountant, who lives across the state, let's say, in one of those specific counties we were talking about earlier, the ones under the relief provision, they've got all my files. Does that mean I'm covered?
You got it. It just goes to show, even in our digital world, everything's still so interconnected. And this is where being proactive is huge. Don't wait for the IRS to connect the dots. If this sounds like your situation, if your records were potentially caught up in Helene's impact zone, give the IRS a call directly. Explain what's going on. They can walk you through the next steps.
Gotcha. It's a good reminder to always be aware of where our important stuff is, right?
That's it.
Physically, digitally, all of it. Okay, so we've talked filing extensions. That's obviously a big deal. But what about the other relief measures out there? I mean, one of the toughest things after a disaster has got to be dealing with those uninsured or underinsured losses. Just heartbreaking. So when insurance isn't enough, what can people do?
Well, the IRS does offer a bit of a lifeline in those cases. If you had losses from Hurricane Helene, damage, whatever it might be, and your insurance didn't fully cover it, you've got the option to claim those losses on your taxes.
Okay, that makes sense. But which year are we talking about?
Yeah.
Do you claim those losses on your 2024 return, or is it back on your 2023 taxes?
Yeah. You've got a choice. This is one of those situations where taxpayers actually get to decide what works best for them. You can claim it on your 2024 return, the one you'll file next year, or you can go back and claim it on your 2023 return, the one you just filed.
So it all comes down to strategy. You got to figure out what's going to be the most beneficial for your own financial situation, right?
Exactly. It's about having some control in the middle of what's probably a very stressful time. Now, here's another bit of good news. The IRS is really pushing these qualified disaster relief payments. These, my friend, are completely tax-free.
Oh, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Tax-free anything is welcome news, especially after going through a disaster.
Yeah.
But what counts? Is it just those FEMA checks we always hear about?
Nope, it's a lot broader than that. Think insurance payouts, of course. But then you've got all sorts of government assistance programs, even payments from charities, or maybe even your employer. As long as they're specifically for disaster relief, you're looking at tax-free money. It's designed to be a pretty wide safety net.
Well, that's good to hear, right? It's not just one single source of help, but a whole bunch of them, hopefully working together. Now, something we don't always think about in these situations is the impact on retirement funds. Disaster hits and suddenly those long-term savings, they might need to become a short-term solution.
Yeah.
And that's a tough spot to be in.
No doubt about it. And that's why the IRS has those hardship withdrawal provisions for retirement accounts. If you're facing a federally declared disaster, Hurricane Helene definitely qualifies. They're basically saying, look, we get it. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And those hardship withdrawals, special rules apply.
Special rule. That sounds like good news because let's be honest, that 10% penalty for early withdrawal, that's enough to make anyone think twice.
Oh, I hear you. That penalty is no joke. But the good news is, when it comes to federally declared disasters like Helene, they waive that penalty for hardship withdrawals. It's about giving people a little breathing room when they're facing those tough decisions.
It's reassuring, though, right? Knowing that those safety nets are there for people. Going through all this, it really hit me. There's a lot to unpack here. It's easy to get lost in the weeds, especially when you're already dealing with, hurricane aftermath and everything.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot to digest, that's for sure. And that's why we always say be proactive. Don't just assume this stuff doesn't apply to you, Take a minute, maybe as we're talking, even think about your own situation. Jot down some notes if you have to. What deadlines are you staring down? What questions are swirling around in your head? What parts of this whole Helene thing actually feel relevant to you?
It's like building your own little checklist as we go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. Doing a little digging up front, even if it seems like a painful, it can save you so much time, money, and stress later on.
No one wants more stress, especially not from the IRS. And speaking of digging for information, for all our listeners who are ready to go down that rabbit hole, don't worry, we've got your back. We'll have that IRS hotline number, a direct link to their disaster relief page. It's surprisingly user-friendly, by the way, and we'll even point you towards VITA, TCE, and those free file options.
Yeah.
All those great resources for free tax prep help. All that will be up on our website after the episode.
Those resources are lifesavers. Seriously. Especially if you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed. Never feel bad about getting a little help with this stuff, especially with all the hurricane craziness thrown in. Taxes are complicated enough as it is, right?
Amen to that. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about all these, extreme weather events. Helene is just one example, but we're seeing more and more of this. And it makes you wonder, are these massive tax relief efforts going to become the new normal?
It's a really interesting question. And honestly, I don't know that anyone has a clear answer yet, but it's something we all need to be thinking about. Like, if these events become more frequent, how does the IRS even keep up? How does it impact everyday people, families, businesses trying to pick up the pieces and rebuild? There are no easy answers here, that's for sure.
It's a lot to consider, right? And on that note, whoa, deep thoughts for a Tuesday. But seriously, folks, even though our deep dive is ending, it doesn't mean your exploration has to stop here. Take this information, check out those resources, and most importantly, advocate for yourselves. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into, well, who knows what craziness we'll uncover next. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and thanks for listening, everybody.